Hey there, listeners. Thanks for stopping by to the podcast today. Please, before you're done listening to this episode, leave us a review. If you're on Spotify, you can review now, and you can also review on Apple Podcasts. But if there's any platforms that I'm forgetting about and you can leave us a review, please do so. If you're happening to watch this on YouTube, and if you don't know, you can watch these podcasts on YouTube now, please like and subscribe to the channel and share the episode as well. So thanks for stopping by, everybody, and enjoy the episode.
Knowledge is Power is where you come to hear people's life experiences to learn from. So, without further ado, let's roll the intro.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I have a dream. Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Hello and welcome back to the Knowledge is Power podcast. This is your host, Max Willett, and today we got another great guest on. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely. Hi, Max. Good to be on the show today. Brandon Green here. I am in Washington, D.C., and I am the founder and CEO of a financial services and education company called Alchemy of Money.
Yeah, and I met Brandon at actually our Keller Williams Coastal Warwick office here in the great state of Rhode Island. And you came in for a very, very educational, informative, and eye-opening class about the alchemy of money. I went into it thinking it was going to be, everybody goes online and sees those little inspirational minute clips about everything you need to do in your life to make, you got to do it, right? But
Sure.
Everybody's like, all right, well, I need to do it. How do I do it? And
Right.
I think that's what the alchemy of money really started to teach me, and all these little things. And we only did not even a full day of a class. And you said you do it for like 2 days, right? Usually.
Yeah, you bet. There's a lot of content there. We got the high level stuff, although we got into a lot of details too.
We did. Yeah, absolutely. It was a great day. So I think a great starting point. Why don't we just talk about your life story? Because the alchemy of money is now, and that came after a lot of things that you had already accomplished in your life, right?
Yes, that's true.
So I think talking about your life story would be a great way to kick off the podcast.
Sure. So I was born in Wyoming in a small town called Rock Springs, which, if you've been to that area of the world, it's a town off of Interstate 80. Most people kind of blow through it on their way to Salt Lake or somewhere else. So I was born there, and it was a trona, or still is, a trona mining town, which is a material that is used for making glass and baking soda and so forth. So a mining town. When I was 12, my dad and my mom decided that Rock Springs maybe wasn't where they wanted to raise their kids, even though they were both born in that area. And we moved to Iowa, where my dad got his PhD in philosophy, which was a really big deal because he was the first person in his family to finish college, let alone get a PhD, or to even go to college, I should say.
Yeah.
And so I look back on that now, and I see that that was a big move for the family, and it really shifted our social economic status to another level through education in the case of my dad. So I grew up in Iowa, sort of part two, I guess, if you will. And in that process, I started to feel that, especially in high school, that the traditional path of going to college, and in the case of my family history, I grew up in a Mormon household, was also to go on a Mormon mission. That just didn't really fit for me. And so I started to seek out other opportunities and decided that I wanted to go on the road with a musical organization called Up With People and see the world. So much to my parents' surprise, shock, a little bit of horror, and then maybe some inspiration, I said, I'm not going to college. I'm not going to go on a mission either. I'm going to travel the world and sing and dance. So the barrier to entry, though, was I needed to raise $15,000 to join that organization in high school. And so my entrepreneurial skills started to shine through, although at the time, of course, I didn't identify that as such. And I sold chocolate Santa Clauses and Easter bunnies and garage sales to the tune of $15,000. And I went on the road and toured with that organization for a couple of years. So, then fast forwarding a little bit, eventually I realized that being a performer full time was probably not what I wanted to do necessarily. So I moved to the East Coast, to Baltimore at the time, and I got a job in a sales company doing cold calling to find companies to use our services. The company was providing information technology staffing services. So my job was to do 100 cold calls a day and to go on 5 appointments and take 3 people to lunch. And I liked it. And I learned a lot about building a pipeline, scripts and dialogues, and how to manage sales. And I also learned that I was pretty good at the sales-like environment and activity, and I liked it. I could see some direct correlation between my activity and my income. And I was like, that's great. I'm going to outwork all my colleagues and make a lot more money than they did. And that's what I did for the first about year and a half before I got into real estate. So that's sort of like the early days, if you will, of Wyoming, Iowa, and then into the Maryland area, into the sales job.
Very cool. So why don't we get into real estate now? And what was the main thing that pushed you into getting your real estate license and getting into the industry?
So as much as I loved the sales environment and cold calling and making good money doing that, I didn't feel a lot of impact. And I had come from this nonprofit Save the World Through Music organization. So I went from like all impact to all money. And I was like, gosh, there's got to be something in between where I could make good money, but also have really great impact. So I was watching a late night TV and an infomercial came on, and you're late night, you tend to be a little bit more vulnerable than other times. And so this commercial was, buy real estate, no money down, and you'll be rich in 90 days and on a beach drinking martinis. I was like, oh, this is great. I'd love to do that. I don't have any money to put down, and I'd love to be rich in 90 days. That'd be awesome. So I was inspired and decided that I would order the course. And the next day, actually within a few days, the course came in the mail, and I went through it, and I learned a valuable lesson at that moment, which was, we have these fleeting moments of inspiration, and they're usually quickly followed by the other side of our brain, which is like, that's a crazy idea, or you're never gonna, what are you doing? And I had that moment of inspiration. And then the next day I had that other feeling, which is like, this is crazy. Let me just go back to my job. But I kept enough of that inspiration to actually begin to dive into real estate. And I realized that it was intriguing. There was a lot more to it than the infomercial revealed. But I could see myself for the first time doing something that had both short-term and long-term benefit. It had impact and financial reward. It's like, this is interesting. So I bought my first piece of real estate on Capitol Hill in the year 2000 using an FHA 203K renovation loan. And I had like $1,000 down or something crazy. I renovated it, sold it, and made a profit. And that was the beginning of me realizing, A, I liked real estate. B, the industry itself showed a lot of promise, and C, I seemed to be really pretty good at it. Although, it was my very first deal, and I could have just as easily lost all my money. But I had enough, confidence to say, okay, I think I can do this, and off I went full time into real estate shortly thereafter.
I know this is kind of going off of your life story, but have you ever met somebody who tried to do a flip and it was their first time and it didn't go well?
Most, it's that way.
Yeah.
I mean, flipping is a very difficult business to succeed in. And so I got lucky, and I realize that now. but sometimes luck is what you need to propel you to the next level. And that is exactly what happened in that flip. And my agent at the time who helped me sell that property, she also saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see in myself and encouraged me to take that flip project and leverage it into an actual career and go into real estate full time. And I credit her tremendously for pushing me up into that and saying, hey, this little sales thing, whatever, you need to get into real estate, get your license and get into sales and investing and see what you can do.
Right. And I wonder, when it comes to flipping, how often the failure comes because somebody rushed into it and the property just wasn't right, and it just wasn't the perfect thing. Because I feel like it just in business in general, no matter what it is, if it's flipping or starting a landscaping company, getting into it too quickly and not doing the proper research or preparing yourself, do you think that's probably the most common reason why people fail at that?
I think that's certainly a contributing factor to it. The other component of it is let's say you do a flip and you make $50,000 in profit, which is pretty decent for a flip. Because of the way that type of activity is taxed, you're going to owe 30 to 40% of that in taxes. So so that leaves you with like 25, 30 grand and an enormous amount of risk to execute that.
Right.
So flipping in some markets can be a really good business to generate cash, though it's certainly a very, very high risk business to do so. And I think people don't quite understand that dynamic. I certainly didn't. And I just luckily was benefiting from the market upswinging in that moment of time. And I happened to buy a property that did not need more work than we thought it did, which is, another big wild card, especially for people that are new into the business.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of money up front, and it's tied up and you don't know how long, depending on the market. And there's a lot of contributing factors where one thing could go wrong and the whole deal is amiss and you're screwed.
Yes. True.
But so how many flips have you done since then, or have you only done that one?
No, I continue to do flipping. So after that, I got into sales full time as a real estate agent and continued to flip half a dozen houses a year.
Wow.
And also I started to hold one of them a year too, because I was realizing I'm like, flipping is generating cash, but unless you keep some of this stuff, it's not really going to help you long term. And so I was like, well, can I generate enough cash with the flips and my sales business so that I can hold one of the properties a year or maybe two a year? And that was a strategy. Now this was the early 2000s. So I was dramatically benefiting in those first few years with the market upswinging and giving me a lot of cushion. And we see this when markets are on the upswing, it cushions your mistakes. And I was making a ton of mistakes, but the market was accelerating fast enough. It wasn't catastrophic, and I still was able to make money. Now, eventually, that came to a crashing halt in the big financial crisis around 2006, 7, and 8. But those first few years, it was really quite a ride up.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's when it comes to flipping, I think like you have to find the perfect market where your construction costs sort of are canceled, or not canceled out, but the area like Rhode Island, I think is a great area because you can find houses for less expensive price, and then the construction costs can be what they are all across the country. But then because you're in a, I guess, premium area like Rhode Island, those costs are offset, so you can make a decent amount of money flipping houses. If you go, if you go into maybe in the Midwest in some rural area where houses are still 150 grand, no matter what way you look at it, there's just not a lot of money to be made there.
True. And the other component of it that is really consequential right now is the cost of capital. So in low interest rate environments, this is a much more viable business. In a high interest rate environment, with a hard money lender, you could pay 30 or 40% cost of capital, meaning if you took out a $100,000 loan, you're going to pay $30,000 in fees to
Right.
get a $100,000 loan. That's all your profit.
Right.
So, having a good low cost of capital basis, construction costs, like you start to see, like there's just a lot of elements that have to come together to make it a viable initiative.
Right. And I have, I've experienced it in my short real estate career so far, and it's crazy. Like the things you don't think about, little things,
Right.
are the ones. I mean, personally, I haven't flipped a house, but I've been around people who have, and it's crazy the amount of things that could go wrong.
Yes.
But what is the way you are finding these properties to flip?
So at the time I was finding them on the MLS.
Okay.
It was not particularly difficult. I continued to flip for about 10 years, and then eventually I got out of it because the margins in the Washington, D.C. area, which is where I am, became too difficult to manage. And I was going to have to go to another metro market or do much larger projects like condominium conversions. And at that point, my career on the sales and leadership side was really taking off. And I made a strategic decision. I'm like, either one of these is a full-time job, and I can't do multiple full-time jobs. So I ended up letting flipping kind of go. And I haven't done any since. Everything I've done has been actually buy and hold.
Yeah, interesting. So what can you explain? Well, we did flipping. Let's explain your real estate sales career.
Sure.
So I think that'd be great.
So let's kind of go back to the parallel.
Yeah.
So did my first flip project, shortly became a real estate agent and started just selling houses. And the way I did it was I didn't know anybody in the DC area. And so I gridded out the neighborhood around my office, and I was like, well, I'm just going to knock on doors until someone happens to need a realtor that day. And I mean, you can imagine that the ratio is low in terms of how many people need a realtor that moment when you knock on the door, but it's not zero. So I started knocking on doors, and it took me about 100 or so conversations, which was probably 200 knocks or more, to get someone who said, that's weird. We were just talking last night about selling our house. Yeah, come on in. Let's have a conversation. And that was how I got my foot in the door. And eventually, after doing a couple of those, then I started to get a little momentum. Had a couple signs. I had a little bit of track record. I sort of thought I knew what I was doing a little bit more. And I did more than I did day one. But that's how I clawed myself into the business quickly. I was like, well, I'm going to spend 12 hours a day knocking on doors, rain, snow, heat, cold, whatever, because nobody else is going to do that. And I launched a career. In addition to that, I did open houses for agents in the office that were really senior and didn't want to do them anymore. And those are the two things I did to generate leads. I was, aware enough. I had a good sales trainer who said, look, everybody that you talk to substantively, you should add to your database so that you can call them or talk to them later. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I was both doing activity to help my sales business today and feeding a database with information about those people to help my sales business tomorrow. And so over time, it got easier as the activity started to shift from me literally having to go out 12 hours a day and knock on doors to me now being a little bit more in the office, doing a little bit more marketing activity to follow up with that list that I had generated the prior year. So I did well. I sold 12 million the first year, 20, and then 30 million. And sometimes people are like, how did you do it? I'm like, I knocked on doors 12 hours a day. What are you doing with your career? There was no magic to it. I just literally put in an enormous amount of time and effort those first few years.
Yeah, the simple way to put it is hard work.
A lot of hard work. Yeah,
right,
I had no life. I had no friends. I had no significant, and I needed to make money. Like I didn't have a nest egg or a trust fund. So, it's very motivating to have no options and to say, I think I can do this. I just need to do a lot of this. And I did a lot of this. Very focused for a long time.
Yeah, I think from my experience talking to newer realtors, they just think that it's gonna happen. Like it's so different because people come from careers where they're working for people. They're coming from working at a restaurant or they're selling printers and they're given leads and everything's given to them. And then they go into real estate and you have to do it yourself. You have to generate your leads. And lo and behold, they didn't realize, selling's actually the easy part.
Yeah, right, exactly.
For me, open houses has been one of my biggest source of gaining leads, right? I haven't done door knocking. I don't know. Do you think that's something somebody could be successful with, especially today?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Last week, literally a door-to-door salesman knocked on my door here in our neighborhood.
Really?
People are still doing it. Yeah.
Do you think it's like that? Are you in a pretty urban area or?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in a detached house in Washington, D.C. So it's urban, but neighborhoody.
Okay.
So certainly not every neighborhood is conducive to it, but a lot are. And I do think that it's hard work. Door-to-door sales is very hard. So I think people are confusing it being hard with it not being possible.
Right.
And it's certainly possible. It's happening today.
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
do you have any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Are there risks or that? Yeah. I mean, there was then too. So, but you learn how to do it. Like you learn when you knock on the door, you take a few steps back. And I mean, there's a way to go about door-to-door sales if that's your thing. And I would say it's the fastest path to immediate sales early on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a database, you don't have a community, you don't know people, it is a direct path to sales because you eventually find someone. If you do it for 12 hours a day for a few weeks, you're going to run into a random who's like, oh, that's weird. Oh, we were talking about it last night. Like, that's how it works. And boop, there's your one. And then you can do other things later.
Do you remember that first deal you got from the door knocker?
I do. I certainly do. And Andy was his name. I remember him, and Lynn Shotwell. I remember their whole names. They're long gone now. And I remember him saying, well, come on in. I'm like, oh crap. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was just knock doors. And then I was like, so I completely winged it. I was like, well, this is a lovely kitchen, but it was just enough that it got me the listing.
Yeah. I mean, you hear fake it till you make it a lot too. That's something
Absolutely.
else I hear, and it's not, I don't like that because it makes you sound like you don't know when you're talking about, when sure, that's true, but you're also learning, you're open-minded, you're there, you're gaining experience. So I wouldn't say you're necessarily faking it. It is true, but a harsh way of putting it. You know what I mean? Because I don't know. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yes. I think anytime you're launching into a new endeavor, you need to bring your confidence in unrelated areas into that new endeavor so that you can be successful into that.
Right.
So call it fake it if you make it, until you make it if you want. But I think it's more like I'm bringing my life experience everywhere I go. And we all have that. And that is the essence of ultimately what makes us successful in a new venture. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to do that. And at the same time, yeah, you want to, especially in real estate, realize you don't know it all, nor do you need to. And nor do people expect you to. They expect you to be connected enough to get answers to their questions, but not to know the answer to every question. And it really takes the confidence to be able to distinguish between those two things and be able to say, I'm not sure, and I'll get back to you.
Right. Yeah. Door knocking is something that I've talked to realtors about it in our area. One especially, I'm not going to say who it was, hates door knocking, and he says he'll never do it. And he was actually on this podcast, but I'm not going to say who that is. But he's a successful realtor. He has a good team, and it's just. But it's interesting to hear you say that. Do you remember like the first sort of like challenging situation you were in? Like, would you say that first situation you were put in with Andy was a challenging situation? Or yeah,
Every
okay.
situation's a challenging
Right.
situation, right? And look, door knocking is but one of many things you could do. I think the mistake people make both early on and later is they try to do too many things. And there's 50 different ways you could generate business. You have to select one or two. And that's hard to do because there's so many different things you could do. And if you're a good entrepreneur, you get bored easily. And you're like, oh gosh, do I have to? So I always know that I am at the precipice of a breakthrough about the moment I'm getting really bored with the activity. And I need to push through that boredom and not to get distracted by the next shiny object and put in the extra work just a little bit longer until the momentum comes. And whether that's, podcasting or it's door knocking, it's the same thing. It's a principle of success in life, right? That you have to do things longer with more consistency and repetition than seems fair to actually get the jet off the runway.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's a perfect transition into Alchemy of Money. So sort of explain what it is, and then we can get into the history of it.
Yes, you bet. So Alchemy is a company that helps real estate entrepreneurs, agents, and investors with their finances. And we do that in two ways. One, we provide services like bookkeeping, tax strategy, tax planning, payroll, financial planning. And then we provide coaching and education through classes like you took or one-on-one coaching. And the whole idea is to help real estate agents end the hustle and build a business to financial freedom. Because what we know, and I know just from my own experiences, most agents don't get into the business because they just love to manage finances. They probably love money to a degree, or maybe to a large degree. But there's a whole other component to succeeding financially that most agents aren't any good at and don't really like to pay attention to. And it causes a lot of pain, both in terms of unfulfilled goals, but also back taxes or whatever. So the company is designed to help with all of that and to help agents get on track, stay on track, and build great financial freedom. And we work with people all over the country, and we're having a great time with it. It really satisfies the things that are important to me. One being impact. I do now really love finances and all the details in that. So that's fun. I love the industry and agents, and I've been one for 20 plus years. So I know exactly how we are. And it's really all come together into really a fun company with a cool brand, right? Alchemy of Money. It's a lot better than Bob's bookkeeping services.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple of things in there I'd like to dissect. But first of all, something that you say a lot is financially free. Right. And I don't think a lot of people understand what that truly means, because there's having money, there's having a lot of money, and then there's being financially free. I think there's a key difference between those two things. And if you could explain that, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Everyone in their mind and in their emotions has an idea of financial freedom. And it's usually based in emotions, how they feel, and or a lifestyle they wish to live, or the impact they want to have. And most people, if you were to ask them, could describe how that feels and maybe some of the results they'd have. So like, oh, I'd be financially free when I could spend every weekend at my beach house, or if I could buy whatever I wanted without thinking about it, or I didn't have to work anymore, but I could, right? Those are sort of experiences or emotions, which is great. You have to start there. Though you can't stop there, or achieving financial freedom is going to be more about luck than anything else. So you have to take that idea of a lifestyle or a feeling and over time translate it into specific dollar amounts, both in terms of assets you need to have in the bank to produce that and or active income that you need to sustain the lifestyle you envision. And that's the hard part, is to do the math around that vision of your life that you see for yourself and figure out how much is that going to cost? How much do you need to have? And then reverse engineering it into a plan in order to achieve that. So financial freedom starts with an emotion, but it ends with a strategy and a plan. And it's the bridging of that gap that is really the work that has to be done.
Right. Yeah. And I you hear Kevin O'Leary say it on Shark Tank a lot, he wants his money making him money.
Right.
Right.
Right. So that's a pithy statement, and it's true. But then the question is, well, how much money are you trying to have your money make? Which will determine how much money you need to have. It'll also determine to a degree where that money needs to be placed, what kind of assets you need to have, which will determine how much active cash you need to have to buy those assets, which will determine what kind of business you may need to have, what revenue it needs to generate. So you could really reverse engineer it all the way back down to this month, my goal is X. And it's that reverse engineering that is the science behind dreaming. The art is, hey, I want to make money, and I want to, but the science is, and so my goal this month is X, and I'm going to accomplish that with 3 key strategies of A, B, and C.
Right. So let's say an agent comes to Alchemy and they say, Brandon, I need your help. What are the steps that you take, and what are the questions you ask to help them?
So we start with where are you going? What's the dream? What's the dream? Tell me about the dream. And then we'll back them up so we can understand to what degree is there a plan, and to what degree are some of the fundamental foundational pieces in place today. Meaning, every dream that has a plan starts with financial reporting and taxes. So we're like, hey, I want to be on the beach or whatever. And after we enjoy that conversation and we reverse engineer it a while, usually we'll come up to, so where are you on your taxes? Right. And then we'll quickly come to, what's the state of your accounting? Right. And people are like, look, if you don't have great accounting and you're not clear and under control in taxes, you're never going to get to your big dream. So we need to build the foundation. So for a lot of members of Alchemy, it's the assessment of the dream, it's the assessment of the plan, and then it's usually coming back to some element of foundational financial work, like the generation of a profit and loss statement, being able to read it, having a budget, being active and proactive on your taxes. Just that alone, what I just said, those 3 or 4 things, that could take somebody 24 months or longer. It is actually difficult to get that right. And it's not super sexy either. It's not that fun, but it is the foundation that has to usually be addressed for most people.
So many people do not understand that and how important it is, especially self-employed people, how important it is to be in control of your taxes.
Yeah. I have an email in my inbox literally today from an Alchemy member who's super excited about their dream, but really sort of a little unhappy with the fact that they need to have accounting records prepared in order to file their taxes. And that's going to be an investment of time and energy, right?
Yeah, I think I was lucky because I had a business already. And I would like to say I had a basic understanding of what it takes to be in control.
Yes.
I have a very good accountant.
Great.
My dad used to be a bookkeeper, so
you knew that you have to figure this stuff out.
Yes, I have since hired a bookkeeper who just does it on the side, and she does a really good job, and she saves me money by having to hire a expensive bookkeeper. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I got ahead having I learned those difficult things, but with a different business.
Yes.
So
Yes.
like getting an LLC, understanding how the taxes work, and you probably need to pay an accountant, $1,500 a year, at least sometimes to make sure everything is in line, because if it's not, things can go very poorly and you will owe a lot more than $1,500 to the IRS and whatnot. And I'm not sure if you want to talk about that story, but I do remember that story you talked about in Warwick. But
well, I'm happy to. I mean, the whole reason I
Okay.
formed Alchemy truly was based on my experience with all this stuff. I mean, we're discussing earlier, like I got really good in sales really quickly, but I had no idea what I was doing with my money. And I ended up getting in the hole with the IRS a few times. And it was extremely painful and challenging and embarrassing to sort of be at the top of the sales board, but getting hounded with these scary notices and wondering if I was going to lose it all, right? And it took me a number of years to both take personal responsibility for that situation, because I had a lot of blame and a lot of it shouldn't be like this, right? How could I owe this much? A lot of that, until I finally had to accept my situation and I had to learn about how the tax law works. We're all subject to it. We don't necessarily love it, but we are subject to it. And I had to figure that out. And it was that sort of that many years in the dark woods experience that led me to really enjoy teaching the topic. I had a really good coach who said, look, the best way you can get better with finances is teach a class on finances. I was like, teach a class? Are you kidding? I have zero credibility here. And he was like, well, that's why you're going to be a good teacher. Like, you got to figure it out. And he was right. And I started to teach class. I got myself ahead on taxes finally, and then started to coach other agents on finances. All the while I was still building my real estate practice, building the brokerage, building a real estate development company. Like, everything I was doing was in the active business for the most part, which I did for almost 20 years. And then when I sold most of that business and took a couple of years off, I thought, well, what do I love to do? What's a need in the market? What could be really exciting? And that's where Alchemy was born. I was like, oh, I could parlay that experience, that personal narrative, that personal empathy I have with a real business providing services and education into a market that needs it, where there's not a lot of competition, and deliver really great service when most people in this space have terrible service. And boom, Alchemy was born. And now we're almost 2 years in and rocking and rolling. So this is my second big chapter, so to speak. The first chapter being the 20 years of real estate sales and real estate assets and so forth. This is now a financial services chapter more, and I've got a couple other businesses going on. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so we go from dancing to your first sales job to flipping houses, then getting your real estate license, to Alchemy. And I'll tell you, that's absolutely incredible, because you had no college degree, which is
yes,
which is awesome, because a lot of people, especially me growing up, it was you had to go to college. You had to go to college. If you don't, you're a failure. And I fell to that notion, and I thought less of people that didn't go to college, including friends of mine. I was like, and it was, and I really, really feel there's no other word to say about it other than crappy, for thinking like that. They're not in immense debt. I'm not either. I was lucky. I learned, within a couple of years, and I was in state, so my tuition wasn't crazy. That college wasn't right for me. And you don't have to be successful. I mean, you don't have to go to college to be successful. There's so many different ways, like what you're doing.
Yes. And I would say I've learned a lot about that. So if someone decides that college is not for them, then the question is, what's the plan? And I think there's a lot of really viable plans. If you are naturally entrepreneurial, like I clearly was. I didn't know it, but my parents knew it. I mean, I didn't mention, but my very first entrepreneurial venture was setting up a lawn mowing business in the trailer court that we lived in, and like charging customers $20 and giving the guys in the trailer court $10 to mow and taking the margin there. So I was like 12 or 13 years old. So my parents clearly saw I had an entrepreneurial streak, and I think that gave them some confidence. So if you decide not to go to college, you may be an entrepreneur. And so, test it out. Go. The best way to figure out if you're an entrepreneur and you're young is to figure out how to sell something. So go buy something in bulk and figure out how to sell it on Amazon and YouTube. If you can figure out how to do that, you may very well be an entrepreneur. You may also be a really great salesperson, and you can get a lot of great sales jobs without owning the business. But, as a matter of fact, I would argue that a lot of entrepreneurs are better salespeople than business owners and would be better off sticking with sales and not going into business. They'll make a lot more money. But sort of understanding that distinction, or going into a trade craft or skill. I mean, we know that the economy is desperately in need of people that can that are carpenters, that are plumbers. Like, these sort of things don't require college degrees. So, in some ways, I was lucky in that my parents were supportive of that, even though they didn't really like it. And I had the natural drive to create something from nothing. But in hindsight, I will say that it also was harder because I did not have the network that one develops in college. And so if you don't go to college, you have to figure out how to develop that yourself. Now all of my friends, for the most part, went to great colleges, and I can see that the network that they came out of the college with that propelled their career or their business or their capital raise or whatever, I didn't have, and I had to make it myself. And it took me a long time to sort of catch up to the head start that those people had. I don't regret it at all, but that is a dynamic you have to think about if you're considering not going to college.
That has been a theme since the first episode of this podcast. The first guest I had on, giving a shout out to Kurt, he owns a fish tank company here in Rhode Island. And he said the biggest thing you get from college is the people you meet and your network. Regardless of what you learn, educationally on paper and books, your network is what is ultimately going to help you out the most.
Yes, exactly.
It's been a theme since the first episode, and I completely agree with that. For some reason, I just felt like I wasn't going to do too well. Like, the biggest thing for me was just working for somebody else and sitting in an office every day for the rest of my life. And I'm sitting in an office right now, but, I'm all over the place, all over the time, like all the time, like I'm not always here, and nobody's looming behind me telling me, Max, you're doing that wrong, or you're doing it incorrectly, and you got to do it this way, and you need to be here by this time and whatnot. It's me. Everything's up to me. And that is where I feel like you need to start to eventually be financially free, because you can't be financially free working a 9 to 5, in my opinion. It can't happen.
Well, it depends on what your definition of financially free is.
Right, exactly. But like, I'm just saying, like, I was going to school for engineering. All right. And talk about corporate, positioning. And I mean, obviously there are engineers that go off and do their own thing, but they're their own bosses, but most of the time as a mechanical engineer, you're working in an office all day, every day, sitting there. Like, that would drive me crazy,
I think it's all about self-awareness and knowing what you're great at, because that would drive me crazy too. But a lot of people, it would drive them crazy of what you or I are doing on a day-to-day basis. I mean,
right.
On one hand, it's nice as an entrepreneur not to have a boss, but on the other hand, it's lonely, right? Every 2 weeks, I'm making a payroll across a few different companies, and it's a lot of pressure, right? And I know, like, the employees are just expecting that's going to show up in their bank account. Like, nobody other than a couple of us are realizing the dynamics behind making payroll every 2 weeks for years on end, right?
Right.
So I think people just have to understand what they're best at And if you don't know, you've got to taste a lot of different things. You got to try a lot of different things until you get alignment with yourself, along with something that actually has lift in the market. So I'm not a big proponent of just do whatever your passion is if you have any orientation for finance at all, because there's a lot of people who are passionate about stuff that you're never going to make any money on at all. So unless you've got a trust fund and you're good, then go do your passion. But otherwise, you better find a decent alignment between something you're passionate about or you enjoy doing and the marketplace that actually needs it and will pay for that service. And your skill set, if your ability to actually perform. And if you can get all those things to come to an alignment, it can be really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right. I sort of oversaw that, knowing what you're good at is insanely important as well. Yeah, it just was for me that big thing of just working for other people. It just kind of, I don't know, like something about it, and I'm still starting out, like I'm still on that, hopefully on that upswing of my entrepreneurial career, and
Yes.
I love engineering, right? Like I have a 3D printing company. Before I got on the Zoom with you, I was creating drafts or blueprints for a customer, and I was designing things and sent a print to a 3D printer. Like that's
Nice.
that's still like it's my passion. I love it more than real estate. And 3D printing is just an incredible technology, but the fact that I get to do that myself feels a lot more, exciting. And I feel like there's a higher cap, what I can do if I was working for somebody, you know what I mean? And that's why I started doing it myself, I think. But I don't know. I could go on. I could blabble on for a long time. Yeah, I think we're going to start wrapping up here. It's been an absolutely incredible conversation. And I end every podcast with this simple question, and it's amazing to hear everybody's different takes on this. But if you were to leave one piece of advice to the listener, could be about anything, what would that piece of advice be?
The piece of advice I would have for your listeners would be selfish. And what I mean by that is we need to put our own oxygen masks on first. Any impact you want to have in the world is at baseline determined by how good you are at taking care of yourself. Because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else. And I find that most entrepreneurs and people in real estate are enormous givers. And that's not a problem. What is a problem is giving back to yourself so that you can sustain the big vision you have for your life and whatever that might be. So I would say, do a little assessment about that. Like, how can you be a bit more selfish? And selfish is a bit of a loaded word, right? We don't like the word selfish, but I really think if you take that and turn it into self-care or, paying attention to your health, these are really critical things that are often lost in the big world of all the things we have to do for other people. So go back to yourself, be aware of what you need, fulfill that first, and from there, everything else can happen.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that advice. And I'll tell you what, this was one of the best conversations I've had. I've been saying that a lot on recent episodes, but I talked to a lot of amazing people, and I appreciate it. And I know it's been great because I have a whole couple pages of questions here, and I don't think I used one of them.
All right.
So, I mean, that's how I know it's been a great conversation. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
and
Max.
One last shout out to Alchemy if you want to go ahead.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about us, you can visit our website, which is alchemyofmoney.co. Yeah, .co. So .com was like 60 grand to buy. I'm like, no, we're going to do .co. Alchemyofmoney.co.
You don't need the M. The M is not worth that much.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you again, Brandon, for coming on. absolutely amazing conversation. Hopefully I'll catch you at one of our offices sometime. Yeah, thank you all for listening to the Knowledge is Power podcast. Make sure to follow us. We're on Instagram and Facebook. Also, we have a Patreon. So if you're interested in getting exclusive content on the Patreon or episodes weeks in advance, go ahead and subscribe for as little as $3 a month on Patreon. So again, thank you, Brandon. Thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.